So, our research objectives are just simply the outcomes that you as a student will aim to achieve. Okay? So, these objectives are what you're going to aim to achieve by simply conducting a research. Okay? So, many research projects, contain more than just one research objective. You know, there's so many areas that you can look at in research. Of course, a research objective could have different areas that need to be covered or simply tackled. So it could be one or more targets of a particular research that you may be required to accomplish. So in order for you to simply create, good research objectives, you first of all need to look at your study diligently and then identify the areas where you think your focus or attention should be closely, paid attention to. So your focus has to be identified or simply placed on a certain area or certain areas where you need to focus your attention to. Those are now the areas of study that you now identify as research objectives. So now, the purpose of a research objective is just to simply drive the research project, which includes data collection and analysis, conclusions, interpretation, and all the other activities that we normally conduct during the particular, process of a research. So, this research objective is what normally drives us to that particular issue or item. So, research objectives also help us to narrow down in on the focus of the research and the key variables that we may be required to identify. Okay, so there are certain key variables that we may be required to identify, and these are the variables that we will now use later on to simply ascertain if this particular problem has certain factors that contribute to the problem or certain factors that may seem to relate to this particular issue that we've identified. So typically, the research objectives appear early in the research proposal. So we've got a certain way in which we write them. So I'm going to look at the general way of how we write these particular research objectives. Okay. So now, sometimes depending on the length of the paper, okay, the proposal or whatever research document that you're writing, you can place certain research objectives in the introduction. So usually right in the introduction, you can identify the objectives of the study. Whilst in this particular case, we're going to have a different section where we simply talk about research objectives and how we simply write them in the proposal. So in your 1.3, you can just simply say research objectives. Now remember, under the research objectives, you are also expected to have two components, namely the general research objective and the specific objectives. The general objective or the main objective and the specific objective. So, what is our general objective? Our general objective is just the main overall statement, the main overall goal that basically talks about all the areas in one. Like it just basically looks at all the areas the study is going to focus its attention to, and then just basically talks about everything in just one general sentence. Okay, so assuming we are conducting a study to ascertain the prevalence, um, or let's say we are conducting a study to ascertain the adherence levels to COVID 19 guidelines in Challenge. If we are conducting a study to assess the adherence levels to COVID 19 guidelines among community members in Challenge. So now our general objective is simply going to be to ascertain or to investigate. You can even use different terms, but remember, certain research terms only apply to certain kinds of topics. So there are certain areas where you may be required to use certain words as investigation, or an evaluation, or an assessment, or an evaluation. There's so many words that we may be required to use. So it all depends on the kind of research that we are conducting So in this particular case, since we are simply trying to investigate, we want to know what the adherence levels to COVID 19 guidelines are amongst the members of the community in Chilenge. So we simply state our general objective as to investigate the levels of adherence to COVID 19 measures, simply to investigate the levels of adherence to COVID 19 guidelines among community members in Chilenge, or we can say a case study of Chilenge. Okay, so that is our general objective. So the general objective is just simply your research title, but phrased as the main objective. Okay, so your research title could be, you know, investigating the levels of adherence to COVID 19 guidelines amongst community members in Chilenge. Then your general objective will be to investigate. So your title starts as an investigation. So your general objective will be read as to investigate. So that's where the difference is. So your general objective is just simply the main area. It just basically looks at the overall research objectives in one. Like it just talks about everything in just one sentence. Okay? So that is basically what we normally are supposed to do. So now, under the general objective, there's what we normally refer to as the specific objectives. Now, these specific objectives are specific areas. Like, since the general objective has just looked at everything as one, so the research objectives are supposed to now look at the specific areas. Like, these are just specific components of the research that we are going to focus our attention to. Okay? Now, these particular specific areas could be four specific areas or five, but we cannot have more than five specific objectives. It's not allowed. Okay. Every good research can identify, you know, five areas a study can focus its attention to, but you can't have more than five. Okay. You cannot have also less than three. I've seen researchers that have two, but I think it's advisable that you don't have less than three specific objectives, like specific areas that a study is supposed to focus its attention to. Okay, so now, how do you simply come up with these specific objectives? Now, I've seen people mostly refer to other researchers done in other areas, and they will simply copy to find out basically if that aspect of those specific objectives could apply in their study. Okay, but what if I told you there's also a formula? There's a way you can actually identify research objectives without having to look at another research in order for you to grasp or learn or simply have an understanding of how you how research objectives should be identified. So now, remember that in any research, in most researches that I've come across, okay, there are simply researches we normally refer to as baseline studies. So baseline studies are the ones that mostly focus on identifying the knowledge, the attitude, and the practice. So if you are conducting any study that relates to a baseline study, you can simply use this formula. Baseline studies basically look at the knowledge, attitude, and practice aspect of a particular research. So, what do I mean by that? So, this KAP formula has been working for some time now, mostly for researchers that are social scientific researchers that are basically looking at a baseline kind of an environment where you simply ascertain to find out if the KAP applies. Okay, so to ascertain different factors in a research, this one can apply. So you can also identify other areas that you think could be, of great importance. I'm not saying it's wrong to look at other researches. It's actually advisable that before you can actually even identify research, objectives, you are supposed to review certain articles or researches done by other people in order for you to simply have a full understanding of what basically should be the areas that you should focus your attention to. So it's important that you also read widely. But mostly with KAP studies, you simply look at the knowledge, attitude, and practice. It's just as easy as that. By looking at the CAP aspect of a study, you simply ascertain the knowledge available amongst the community members to ascertain why why they are or they are not abiding to the COVID-19 guidelines. You can look at the second issue, which is the attitude. How is the community members' attitude towards COVID-19 guidelines? Okay, so you can also look at the attitude aspect. You can also look at the third aspect, which is the practice or the policy aspect, to find out what measures have been put in place to simply tackle this issue. So the KAP simply stands for knowledge, attitude, and practice. So this is normally used to come up with research specific objectives for most baseline studies or for most researches that are conformed to communities, where you are simply studying the behavior of community members. You look at issues to ascertain if there is knowledge. Knowledge is one thing that normally will help you understand why people are not doing a certain thing. So to understand if there is abidance or if people are abiding to the guidelines, we look at knowledge. What kind of knowledge is available? Okay, what kind of knowledge is available? That is one aspect. Secondly, how is the attitude of these people towards this problem? And thirdly, what is government doing or what are the community members doing to resolve this issue? Okay, so the first specific objective you have identified is to ascertain the levels of knowledge amongst community members regarding the levels of adherence to COVID-19 guidelines. Secondly, you look at to ascertain the attitude of the community members towards the COVID-19 guidelines or the COVID-19 pandemic. Thirdly, to look at what government or policymakers or other stakeholders are doing to ensure that this issue is firmly resolved. Okay, so you could be doing other researches that may not really be social in some way. So in this regard, you are expected to review. You are supposed to review different articles and different papers just to look at how other people were able to handle that issue. But if you have a great amount of information regarding your problem that you are studying, if there's a great amount of information regarding this particular problem that you're studying, you can in fact come up with areas that you think are supposed to be covered. You can obviously look at different issues, different areas of the study that you think should be covered. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video, and in the next video I'm going to be talking about research questions and how you simply come up with good research questions. Thank you for taking your time to be a part of this great platform. I hope you've loved it. I hope you've enjoyed our lesson today. And I'm hoping that, in future, you can as well just invite other people to come. Even just right now, just invite a friend, two people to come through, leave a comment. If you've got a problem that you don't seem to understand with any research issue, just leave a comment or call the number on our platform so that we'll get back to you and see how we can help each other. So this has been your man Steven. Thank you for watching. See you next time.